One of my favorite persons here in town, if I can say persons, is Mike Fields, our district attorney. Mike, good to see you again. Thanks for joining us.
You bet. Thank you for having me.
Good morning.
I understand that you've been doing a little bit of TV circuit. You was on and Channel 4, I just lost the name of the show. Flashpoint, thank you. I don't have memory problems at all, you know, and then he was on the show on Channel 9 and now on Good Morning Enid. So, Mike, thanks for taking time. I know you're a big advocate for, victims' rights and things of this nature. But this month in April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So it's a topic that probably needs to be addressed. It's uncomfortable, probably, oftentimes, to be addressed. But right off the bat, what is, sexual violence? Can you kind of define it for us? As a district attorney, I'm sure there's the legal term, if you will.
Yeah, so glad to have the opportunity to come and to hopefully raise the level of awareness about sexual assault in our community and in our nation. The easiest definition is sexual assault. We define that as any unwanted sexual activity, any unwanted sexual activity. And it's usually accomplished through force, fear, coercion, manipulation, threats, that sort of thing.
Okay.
Now, Mike, who are typically the victims of sexual assault? Can you clarify that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. Victims of sexual assault are all of us. I mean, they're all around us all the time. People that you would maybe never imagine been the victims of sexual assault. No respecter of persons, no respecter of socioeconomic status. But statistically, we know that 95% of sexual assault victims are women, and about half of that 95% are under the age of 18.
Oh my!
Wow.
Wow. Well, a lot of these topics, or a lot of the questions that we prepared today, are I would just classify as on the sensitive side, if you will, and not to be judgmental or anything. But my next question talks a little bit about the offenders. Is there a profile? Is there? Well, I guess that is the question. Is there a profile of these offenders?
I don't know that we can say that there's a profile.
I'm sorry, that may be the wrong word.
No, I think I know. I think I know what you mean. There may not be a profile in the sense of we can define it clearly, but there certainly is a profile in the sense that we know that the overwhelming majority of perpetrators are people that have a close relationship to the people that they victimize. So in other words, we like to. Sometimes we think that sexual assault occurs in the dark alley with a total stranger, and certainly that does happen sometimes. But by and large, the overwhelming majority are committed by people that they know, 2/3 in fact.
And has that been the case basically since records have been kept?
It has.
Okay.
It has. And if you think about it, it makes sense because to perpetrate on somebody, it needs to be someone that's in a position of authority, position of influence, somebody that we're close with, that sort of thing.
Maybe trust?
Absolutely.
Something
it's a
like
big
that.
one.
Okay.
Yep.
Wow. And Mike, we know that victims of sexual assault, they go through a tremendous trauma, and that has an impact on their lives. Some of them have considered suicide. But what are the effects of sexual violence that you've seen or are more familiar with?
Absolutely, wide-ranging effects. Sexual assault is a crime that leaves scars that last a lifetime, and it's scars that we can't see on the outside because they're psychological, emotional. It's that feeling of never quite getting your peace of mind back, always being fearful, always being afraid, those sorts of things. Like I said, scars that last a lifetime.
Thank you for joining us this morning. Our special guest at the round table is District Attorney Mike Fields. Mike, you mentioned that 95% of those that have been the result of assault, 95% were women. And then I guess you said half of that were people under 18 or whatever. So what can a person do to kind of lower the risk of this? Of sexual violence?
There are several things that you can do that are just kind of commonsensical. In other words, if you're going to go out, then it's better to go out with a group. Arrive together, leave together. Never leave your drinks unattended in a public place because we know that drug-facilitated sexual assault has become a huge problem all across our nation. And I would say that one of the most important things is, don't be isolated with someone that you might not feel comfortable with or that you might not know that well. And then finally, I would say, have that thought process in your mind beforehand about the level of intimacy that you're willing to engage in with this person that you're with. Think about that beforehand so that you're not having to think about that in a stressful situation kind of on the fly, so that it becomes much more easy for you to communicate and define those boundaries as you get closer and closer to those boundaries.
Well, and I think you've just answered one of our questions about how many people are affected by sexual violence. Is this a big problem in Oklahoma, in Garfield County?
It is. And unfortunately, it's a problem everywhere. This stat blows me away, guys, every time I hear it. 1 in 6 women have either been raped or been the victim of an attempted rape at some point in their lifetime. And that's unbelievable.
And that's Garfield County.
1 in 6, yeah, and that's all across our nation.
Oh, wow.
It's amazing. There may be some misconceptions or some myths regarding sexual violence or sexual assault. What are some of the common ones?
I think I touched on one of the most common ones, and that is that sexual assaults are committed by total strangers.
Oh yeah, the dark alley.
Yeah, and certainly they can be.
4 in the morning kind of.
Absolutely,
yeah. Okay.
But that's a small minority.
Okay.
The other myth that I always like to speak on is the idea that somehow it's the victim's fault. And if you think about it, sexual assault is the only category of crime that we consider certain things. In other words, for someone who's been burglarized, we never say, hey, you know what, if you didn't live in such a nice house and maybe your house wouldn't have been burglarized. We never say, hey, because your watch was so nice, I mean, maybe it wouldn't have been stolen. We never ask those sorts of questions in the context of any other crime except for sexual assault.
Interesting.
Wow. So what can you do if you're being a victim of sexual violence? Where can you go for help? Because if you mention that 2/3 of the people that have been affected, they knew their perpetrator and probably they trust them.
Absolutely.
So what can they do to ask for help?
I think the biggest thing is to realize that sexual assault as a category of crime is probably the single most underreported category of crime that we have. Very personal, very private, deep wounds, deep scars, not something that a lot of people are comfortable reporting. But I want to encourage people to report, preserve evidence, don't change clothes, go and get medical attention, because there's ways that we can gather evidence and preserve evidence. Hey, report. Don't be afraid to do that. Just know that there are people out there that want to stand with victims, want to help them, want to help restore them, want to help them on that journey toward healing.
Mike, you just shared earlier in our visit that the percentage, if you will, or there's a number of people that are impacted by this under the age of 18. Let's take that a little bit, say younger. What can we do as parents, grandparents? What can we do to protect, my child from sexual abuse?
Great question.
More common sense approaches?
Yes, absolutely. And there's two things that I harp on in regard to the way we coach up our children to try and lessen the chances that they'll be victimized. The first is communication. We need to be constantly communicating with our children, and the way I describe it is we need to be blunt with them. We need to tell them, hey, it's never okay for someone to touch you here. It's never okay for someone to touch you there. It's never okay for an adult to say, don't tell your mom and dad about this. It's never okay. And so we need to constantly be sending that message to our children. They get back from places, we need to say, did anybody touch you inappropriately? Did anybody do anything to make you feel uncomfortable? Did anybody do anything to you? And then say, don't tell your mom and dad. Those are questions that just need to be a regular part of our discussions with our children. And then the last thing I would say is, as parents, we've got to trust our instincts. That mama bear instinct is a real thing. And as parents, if there's something that we don't quite feel right about, whenever we see our children, they interact a little differently with someone else, or our child seems to be maybe a little more withdrawn than usual, acting a little differently, hey, trust our instincts and let's start asking questions.
Wow.
Very good. Our time is about gone this morning. Jamar's got one more question, I believe.
Yes, and our last question is there a local number that people can call for help?
Absolutely. YWCA, right here in town, right across the street from the hospital on Garriott. Tremendous resources for victims of sexual assault, counseling, drug and alcohol treatment, help people get back on the right track. So yeah, the YWCA is a great resource.
Okay.
And while we're on that topic, let me get a plug in, Steve.
Sure.
The first Friday of May, downtown square, it's going to be Walk a Mile in Her Shoes. It's going to be community leaders, all kinds of folks in our community. We put on the red high heel shoes and we walk around the downtown squares to raise awareness about sexual assault, domestic violence, and to raise some money for the YWCA.
I've seen some of the evidence of pictures of that.
Yes.
And in your world is evidence, right?
That's
so,
right.
So I had to throw that word in there. Mike Fields, our district attorney, thank you so much. This is a topic that needs to be discussed, and thank you for helping us with it, Mike. Appreciate you being here this morning.
Yes.
And again, that number 234-7581 is the number to call.